think we're probably going to take about 40 minutes, and we're going to talk through a number of things, but really focusing on what makes a live service game tick. We're going to give you some tips, some tricks. There'll be times for questions at the end. My name's Matt, as Horst nicely said. I'm the Sales and Biz Dev Director of Chillingo, who are now part of Electronic Arts. And I've got Andy Needham, who's going to help me present, who's our head of studio. So on that note, for those of you that don't know about Chillingo, this is why we're on stage. We've lived and breathed indie games for almost 15 years now. It's been a great roller coaster ride throughout those years. We've made hits like Angry Birds and Cut the Rope back in the day. We've been bought by Electronic Arts, so we benefit from their reach and their scale and their intelligence, which is hopefully what we can give you some insight into today, because everyone's looking for live service games. It's going to be an interesting ride. Let me first step into what is a live service game. Now, live service games, we're asked a lot about what sort of games are publishers looking for these days. What games are successful? What games breathe life into the market for the next 5 to 6 years? And they're what we call live service games. You may have heard this a number of times today. I'm going to try and give you an example. When we first started out in the mobile industry, there were games like Cut the Rope, which were paid games or premium games. Behind the structure of these games, there were infrequent updates. They may have been updated opportunistically, so when people got to the end of their content, there was an update. There was no real server behind the game. There was no need for a server. There was no events, and by events, we'll talk about this a lot later in the presentation, but events like leaderboards, challenges, daily modes, all these kind of things. And there was absolutely no need for daily analytics. Analytics we live and breathe now. We then move into games like our games, and I've used examples of all of ours, Pixel People, which is a freemium game, or free-to-play, whatever you want to call this now. These games did have updates, and developers thought about updating their games frequently, but they also had some form of in-game currency, and where these differed to paid games is they have an in-game store. So developers started to think about how they balance their currency versus core game loops versus content. So they became freemium games. So it made a player, to enjoy this game, you had content, you could burn it, you could grind, or you could convert. They had a basic use of analytics. And a basic, by that I mean you're looking at your average, your DARPU, your ARPU, your retention metric, kind of what you hear a lot, but it's not real live service on what they're using the analytics for today. They didn't have server-based events. And I think this is the critical difference between something of a freemium game and a live service game, live events. So we're going to use today a game called Iron Force. But what these games are about is they have very frequent content updates. But content is split, client and server. You'll see more and more games moving away from client updates. It was all about client updates over the last 2 years. How many updates can I get? Can I get featured in best new games? Now you'll see more games actually service their players via a server. Client updates are say for something really, really special. So live service games split this up into two. They have regular events. It could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be hourly. There are things happening in these games that keep people coming back again and again and again. It's a different experience every single day. They have a major use of analytics. And what this means is this isn't just to balance economies or player progression, but it's also used to service the event. So it might be that you see a certain item becoming very popular. Let's do an event around that item. It's much more in-depth, and you need people really dedicated to this. They're super social. Freemium games were social. You know, share this, share that, share a picture, use friends to progress. Whereas live service games use social power to something completely different. It's all about competing with friends or competing with the world or teaming up together in a co-op fashion. So we'll talk about all of these going through. The example we're going to use, and this kind of gives us credibility why we're here today, is one of our hits, which is Iron Force, which is a tank battling game. It launched back in July 2013, and since that day, it has consistently remained in the 100 top grossing apps on both Google Play and iOS. It's something we've worked very hard on with Coolfish Games. They're the developer who are based in Beijing. I've got some stats up there. Yes, it's available on both platforms. It's amassed around 30 million downloads, and it's localized into 10 languages. So throughout this, Andy and I will reference things that we've done in this game that hopefully you can attribute to your own games. So what are the challenges of managing a live service game? And I've tried to split it into 4 sections. Retain, gain, convert, and support. This is all about players. It's player, player, player first. It's not about how much revenue I'm making, what my convert. It's making sure players are serviced, they're having fun, they're coming back, they're telling their friends about it. So throughout this, we'll split it into these sections. I'll let Andy talk to you about retaining players.
Okay. Thank you. Let the player drive your game. What you want to do is just provide him with the best, most efficient and fastest road to aid his progression. So we've put the player first. One of the first things you could do is start to ask the players what they want in their game. And this is what we did. We held a poll. Straightforward, ask them the questions, what do you want next? Top of the polls was, we want tier 6 tanks, and we want a new map. And what we did here is we used this also to start to increase the social activity around the game. When you start to ask about what they want next and they vote for it, this is what they're going to be talking to the communities about what to expect. We held a competition for naming the map. We call it the freight map. Also, what we also did is when it came to the tier 6 tanks, we started to look on their networks and speak to them on what tanks they're finding popular in real life. And then we selected the 3 tanks there. One's based on a Polish stealth tank, one's based on an Israeli main battle tank, and another one's on a Russian prototype. But these guys live for tanks, and they appreciated that we'd gone to so much detail. You've also got to think about how long these games are going to last. You know, normally you used to talk of retention in 30 days. Retention now you're talking 1, 3, 5 years. And you really do need to start planning for the long term of what you're going to do. So when it comes to updates, you don't want to keep pumping out more and more of the same stuff. You'll burn them out, you'll burn yourselves out.
You talk about regular events, and I touched on it at the start. Regular events and offers, they drive 2 things. They drive convergence and retention. Good events keep people coming back, but it's your analytics that you should use to be surfacing events that will drive convergence. And I mean convergence, making people pay. In Iron Force, we've got a number of images here. The most basic things of events that we have are the leaderboards. So there are live tournaments. These tournaments refresh daily, they refresh weekly, but they're making sure people in legions are getting to the top of the leaderboard. We then do simple things that you can all think about, which is, what reward am I going to get if I share, if I connect to Facebook? It's dead simple stuff. But then where the clever things come in, and these are the last 3 images here, is you've got rewards for daily people that are coming in, but those daily rewards change because it's all server connected. As I said at the start, all this is server side delivered. We then change the events. Now, I'm sure you've heard in many other presentations that you should have events around seasonal times, like, you know, we've just had Chinese New Year, Christmas, Easter. Of course, do things like that. But what's stopping you doing things on times? These are live service games, so you can see when players love to play. Is it in the evening? Is it on weekends? Make sure you're giving them new events. And on this, we do things like patterns and decals, which give you a player advantage. It might be that we see in the analytics that there's a certain pattern or decal that people prefer to use on the weekend, so we'll offer that as a sale to these consumers. So we're servicing these things. Like Andy said, tier 6 tanks. You can do a tier 6 tank sale, and boom, we see a spike in convergence. But then later in the week, we see a lull in convergence while people get used to this content. So anything that you do as a regular event, it has to be really all thought through, because it will have a knock-on effect to your ongoing revenue as well as your ongoing production cycles. I'll just hand back to Andy for...
So again, we talked about how we asked the players what they want the most, and by far the other thing that they wanted was to be able to play together as teams. So what we created here was legions. Again, they form the legions, they form the teams, and we asked them again, what do you want to do with the legions? And they want to fight other legions. So we created a event that's called League of Legions. What happens is that 2 to 4 players from a legion, they can get together, challenge another players from other legions and have a battle. But what we also do is that in those battles, we reward the individual players, but the team as a whole get a reward as well. And what we're doing there is we're strengthening the bonds within that team. When you're contributing to your Legion, you're building up your kudos, you're building up the respect. The loyalty these guys have to each other, I think, is pretty as much as strong as you get in a real fighting unit. You can see to here, these legions have arranged via other media to get together in arenas to take the team shots. So this shows you that the legions are starting to create social activity way beyond the game. The other thing you've got to think about, and you're arranging the social side of the games, is when the players are going to be able to play best. And what we've done with League of Legions is we've done it as a weekend event. That's when most of the players are available. And then what we also do is we have it on a 4-hourly intervals. So players around the world know that's the time to go in and gather to go for a battle in the Legions. So we've been talking about some of the big major things, but you should also pay attention to details and the smaller things. Like I said before, you're going to be talking of a game that's lasting for years, and you'll need sometimes to just refresh the game. One of the reasons why you might want to refresh the game is that as you've added features, new things come onto the UI. And rather than just sort of bolt them on, there comes a time when you just got to redesign and redo your layout so it becomes efficient again. Another reason for changing is a bit similar to sort of like car manufacturers. You know, midlife, they do a facelift. They don't really need to do a facelift, but it's just all the other cars and the environment around them starting to change in fashion. So you can see on the left-hand side, when we started off, we had like a skeuomorphic 3D, buttons looked real, it looked great. But as the platform aesthetics have changed, it did start to look dated. So we've now gone for a much simpler, cleaner, flat design.
So that's about retaining players, which I think in a live service game is the most important thing. So we looked at content updates, regular interface changes, events. All these things will help you retain your current player base because they are the most important thing. And I want to highlight what Andy said about that social bond. If you can create a social bond between your players, they will find it very difficult to want to break that bond or leave that game. It's like a group of friends. If you've got a real tight group of friends, hardly anyone ever leaves it. So we always try and think that when you're planning making a game, think about that 1, 3-year, 5-year retention. But how are you going to create that social bond with people? In Iron Force, as Andy said, in some of those images, they stop the game. And I don't know how they're doing it. They might call each other up on another phone and say, hey, can you stop, move to the left, move to the right, we're going to take a picture. But it's such a powerful thing. The next thing is gaining new players. And this is as important as retaining players, but hopefully if it's a live service game, we've already done this bit. This is the big one. So does anyone in the room know any good UA companies? And if we're all the same, our LinkedIn profiles are full of UA companies offering us new channels and the best things out there. But look, the facts are there that user acquisition is very important when it comes to publishing games. And it has to be built into your marketing. A lot of developers that we talk to say, right, we're going to go and spend some money on user acquisition. I'm like, okay, well, that's an interesting strategy because you should be spending money on user acquisition every single month. It's not something that you do once, it's something that you continuously do. And I've got a couple of graphs there. This is all public information, which shows the amount of downloads from the app stores attributed from advertising is decreasing. But the cost of getting that is increasing. And you'll hear all these horror stories of companies going out and spending $30, $40 per install. But the fact is it's around about $4 and a bit for a high value install, which is incredibly expensive. But you as a game developer or marketeer also should start thinking about other marketing channels as well. The mobile platforms are now very mature for a gaming audience. And these audiences, you've got to think about what's your above-the-line strategy, what's your through-the-line and below-the-line strategy. Are you advertising on TV? Are you taking out magazine adverts? All these things is user acquisition, but you should be spending a certain amount. And I would say to really break the charts these days, you've got to be spending 6 figures, I'm talking US dollars, every single month to make sure that your game's in the charts. And to do that, you've got to have your KPIs and they've got to be strong. But you might be in a live service game. It's quite interesting. And what we've noticed with Iron Force is we did first focus on how do we become huge on a global scale. But then over time, we've realized actually certain markets have started to pop up that have been really popular, and that could be China, it could be Russia, it could be the United States, could be Germany, wherever. That's where we focus our UA campaigns. It doesn't have to be global. You can really hone it in and get great value. Ultimately, look, it's not the end solution. It doesn't mean if you've got vast amounts of money, you can just flood the market and make a successful hit. It has to be really thought through and calculated. But it is extraordinarily important when it comes to gaining new players.
So, as Matt says, the real importance of marketing. A lot of top games now are using professional advertising agencies. And they're doing that to make sure that the marketing assets they use are the very, very best. And those advertising agencies, every time they do a marketing campaign, the next one has to be even better. So really try your damnedest to improve your assets every single time. And the best way to sort of work your assets to sort of make sure that they are the very best is to be scientific about it. Create a variety of assets, put them to the test, do an A/B test. We're able to do this at EA with some quite sophisticated tools, but you can quite easily use Typeform or Google Experiments and do your own testing. So if you have an argument amongst which is the best icon to use for your game, send it out, do a test, you'll keep improving it.
Yeah, and I think we heard in the presentation before us about how important A/B testing is, but ultimately, the big end goal, certainly on iOS, is to get that branded storefront. And they will give it to you if you've got a game that's achievable. But with every update, and I talked about client and server updates, with every client update, that's what you're aiming for. You're aiming for new marketing assets, you're aiming for placement. And to quickly go on about placement, this is super important, but it has to be managed effectively. And I think this is kind of a truth that we've held close to our chest, being a publisher. And here are some tips when it comes to it is, a client update has to be worthwhile. Anything that's not worthwhile being client update should be delivered via the server. If you have a client update, you must be confident enough. This is like a relaunch of your game. You should have new assets. You should have a new icon. You should have new screenshots. You should have new marketing assets, where if you're spending on UA, new videos, new trailers, the whole lot, because you can secure placement on the App Store. I would then suggest, as I mentioned before, about locations. So if your game is resonating really well in Russia or China, focus on the app stores in those regions. Get in front of the people at Apple and the relevant channels that you're working with, and they will feature your game. We've given enough notice period. We as a publisher give these channels 3 months notice period of something coming. You know, and I remember talking to a few guys who said, "Oh, we've got a game coming out at Christmas time." And I said, "Oh, have you shown the teams at Apple?" "Yeah, we showed them last week." This was in November. And it was like, dream on. You're not going to get any placement. These are retailers, and they stock their shelves. So you have to give them, I would say as a suggestion, you're drip feeding information 3 months before, and then you're giving them 6 weeks notice with a hard date of when that game goes live. And your chances of placement will be vastly increased. Maybe some of you have got contacts, maybe you haven't, but I would say as a developer, these are the things you need to try and get. And this is, all these things we're saying are these things that you've got to kind of think about as a developer. Is these are the things that I want to do, or do I want other companies to manage? So with UA and marketing, you can go and use agencies, you can use publishers. It's up to you what you want to do. But things like updates are incredibly important. And with things like, with Iron Force, we actually use updates as a retention form, not actually gaining new players. It fits into both. Because as soon as you have an update, it can reinvigorate lapsed players too. The second thing about gaining new players, and there are 2 reasons why people install games. One is what editors and influential people like app stores are telling you to download, you know, editors' choices and things. The second thing is what communities or people you respect, like your friends, are telling you. So if you use your communities and engage with your communities, they will advocate your product. So when it comes to user acquisition, we think, well, we're just going to advertise our product. Okay, but how are we using those communities that say, oh, I've read about this game, this is brilliant. Use that person, get in contact with them, talk to them. Use your App Store reviews, what people are saying on social networks about your game. Use it. Make sure that people are playing this game, it becomes their hobby. That is the goal for us as game developers, is getting your game to become their hobby. They wake up, they play their game. Whenever they've got 5 minutes, they play their game. When they go to bed, they're thinking about your game. When they're not playing your game, they're thinking about your game. That's the ultimate goal. And if you can set up your communities correctly, this can be a real strong tool. And I think I talk about it a bit later on, but we have things like open communities and closed communities. You have to think about both. So an open community is something like Facebook or Twitter, where it's all visible. So if someone starts saying negative things about your game, you've got to react really quickly, otherwise the rest of the world sees it and thinks, well, that's a terrible game, I don't want to download that. But how about if they started mentioning, don't stop someone saying that, but give them a forum that they can say it where you can feedback on it. So we'll talk about that in a second. But ultimately, communities can become a very, very powerful tool of acquisition. We're now going on to the big one, which is converting to spend.
Players actually want the games to be monetized. It might come as a surprise, but for players, they see monetization as a strategic tactic that they can use at smart times. One of the strongest skills that players demonstrate is something called efficiency. They actually look upon the economy as a way for them to demonstrate their ability to maximize their game using the economy. So a player will look at a promotion, buy some gems, look at the upgrades that he can get, use those in a timed event, and what he does is every minute of his play, he's seen the dial get quicker. And the way we sort of think about converting to spend is that when you've helped that player get from A to B, and he looks back at himself from B, he thinks that was a smart move. That gave me extra value. I'll do that again. That's the moment of conversion. So I just touched upon how promotions are vital in live service games for those players. You know, they look upon them as that chance, that opportunity. They spot it, they grab it, and then they use it. And what we try to do is make sure that we're giving them a structure to why they are buying stuff and why they are progressing. So again, we gave that hint that tier 6 tanks were coming, but we actually started to sort of lay the ground for players of tier 5 tanks to start to progress towards that point. So we started in November, and tier 6 tanks came out for Chinese New Year. So you can see how much far back we started that tactic. You don't want to overdo the promotions either. If you keep promoting stuff again and again and again, you'll see that spike, and as Matt says, you'll see the dip, and you'll tire very quickly. Again, if you're using it to help people progress, don't be blatant about it. Mix up those promotions, because what players like is that spotting the opportunity.
And I just think, just add one thing on this, is it is all about planning those live service events and in-game promotions. As Andy said, we presented tier 6 tanks, but our analytics were saying the community's not ready for it yet. Then not enough of them are at tier 5 to get to tier 6, so we actually delayed the release slightly. We got people through tier 5 before we released tier 6. So when I talk about analytics, it's things like that that should be telling you, hey, I've got a great idea next weekend. Let's do a sale on gems. Okay, well, let's really think about that. What does that sale mean? Is it really going to aid fun to our players? Is it going to get people through the core loop? The graph on the right there is quite an interesting one. It's probably quite small text, but it talks about different the sales of different tanks. And as you can see, that line is actually a revenue spike. That's when we put a sale on. But then you can also see straight after the line, it dips behind the medium. So it actually has an effect on revenue. It could have been the same, but sales don't necessarily drive income. They drive retention. So think about this as you're planning these. So what we wanted to show here is almost like the 3 stages where you start to use analytics to focus in on your promotions and focus in on you're going to get new content. So in the soft launch stage, what you're doing there, you're just sort of making sure the game's balanced, making sure the economy works, make sure the game's ready to go out without many breaking. You then go live, the game then starts to get lots of users. It starts to create its own life then. Players come in, different dynamics change, then you use your analytics to sort of track what they're doing, keep an idea of what players want and where they're going. And then the next phase is what you want to start to do is to sort of focus in on those individual players.
We've been looking at the game as a whole, but the next stage is start to look at those individual players. Start to track where their progress is and start to get into the mindset of what they're wanting next. So if they're in a tier 4 tank, start to think of what things they're looking for. Segment them. Find out where they are in the game and focus your promotions with stuff that's relevant to them. There's no point selling 18-inch tyres to a car that's got 16-inch wheels. Make it relevant. That way, the people will engage with it all the more.
And I think a lot of this is about adding fun to the player. And it's quite interesting with Iron Force. We always think about, well, we've got this certain player base, these cohort people. Let's give them something. The problem that we've got is players talk to players. Once you've got this real active community going on, one player will put their hand up and say, oh, I got my content for 70% off. And then you've got everyone else saying, well, why can't I have my content off for 70% off? So you have to think about this because you will get a little bit of backlash in the communities. But ultimately, if the players are having fun, it's a good thing for the game. So the last topic that we come on to, which is supporting your players. And I really believe this is kind of the thing that people forget about so much when they make games. If you're making a live service game and you really want it to be a hit, you have to start thinking about this from day one. It is as important as anything else we've discussed. With a game like Iron Force, we've learned over the 3 years that it takes incredible teams to talk to our players, and you need a certain skill set to do it. We've had to employ people to do this. God forbid if I was a single-man developer and I had to service a game with, upwards of, I don't know, let's give it a benchmark figure of about 200,000 DAUs, you're going to have emails, you're going to have people talking about your game. It's a 24-hour job. So the way that we do this is we call this kind of like publishing 3.0. The barriers to entry are so high in mobile gaming to get someone into your game, but the barriers to exit are so low that you've just got to support your players. And supporting players isn't just customer service, it's all sorts of things. So let's dive into this one. So I talked about communities a minute ago, and I think you have to set these up. You don't want to dictate what people say on your communities. Never delete comments and things like that. But just think about how you respond to it. Think about how like hotel chains use TripAdvisor. When you see someone post something negative, someone comes back on it. These are really cool things. So think about where your game's resonating. Where are players talking? So in the West, it tends to be things like Facebook and Twitter. But what about QQ and WeChat in China? What about Kakao and Line in Asia, in Korea and Japan? You've got to be on these platforms. VK in Russia, for instance. So you'll need teams looking at this. If you want to do this yourself, then great, or use a publisher. They'll do it for you. And make sure that the publisher has teams to do this for you. I talk about closed communities and open communities. All the images there that I think are all open. So there's all sorts of things being said about our game that sometimes make us sweat and cry, sometimes make us with absolute delight, but you've got to be on these places and just have someone monitoring them. Give people something to talk about. So you'll see us release pictures of a new update that's coming out. It gives them something to discuss, but we never interfere with what they're talking about. We just let them go ahead and do it. So you need to think about this kind of stuff. Sishu?
Okay, so Matt talked about how we support the players, but the players want different types of support at different stages. And we provide 3 layers of support. The first one is something called Command Post. I think I could best describe it as our Camp David. This is a forum where we've invited some of the top players, the most engaged players, the most vocal players who want to get in touch with us. They've been saying, hey Chillingo, we want to talk to you. But what we found is they were sort of thinking they were talking to a faceless monolith. And what we did, we reached out to them and we became human to them. And so we had direct one-to-one conversations with these people where they could discuss the issues they had, the issues that all the community had, and we could explain our side of things. And what happened then is those conversations then started to permeate around the rest of the community, and then they started to understand both sides. And it is two-way traffic. We found out lots of things about the game that we didn't realise. The other one that we have is called Answers HQ. This is the opposite end. This is where players just want to go in and find out an answer to a question straight away. They want instant answers. They don't want to enter dialogue. Answers HQ is a forum that is run by players. A player can go in there, ask a question about the game, and another player can pick it up and give the answer. And if the player who gets the answer likes the answer, they give him XP points, so it's gamified. And you'll get people in this Answers HQ who will start to move up the ranks and start to be really active and almost become part of our team. And when they do reach a certain point, we start to reach out to them and to see if we can use them to do more testing and understand the games better. But there comes that point when an individual player has a really individual issue. It could be they've lost gems, they've lost their account, and they need a one-to-one relationship with one of our service agents. And the key to getting a resolution on one of these tickets is trust. The player has to trust the person who's dealing with their issue as being genuine, honest. The answers they're getting is the very best answer they get. Even if you can't fix it, you can fix the relationship. We tend to think not so much as customer satisfaction as customer enthusiasm. It's about what happens during that operation of speaking to our agents and when they go back out again. From being rather grumpy to thinking they've been treated special and they love the game and they go back into the game and start to reinvest in it again. And you can see in the sort of conversations there that it starts off, "Dear Chillingo," and ends up with, "Hi, Dave." Dave understands the game every bit as much as them. Along with Dave, there's Sean, there's Sarah. They all play the games, they know the games back to front, and they talk to the players as players and respond as players. And it's that respect that builds up that trust.
And the main aim of all of this, supporting your players, helps everything else. It helps the retention, it helps them also endorse your game, becoming an ambassador for your product. Andy talked about Answers HQ, where we're using our players to be our service people. Someone logs in there and goes, "I've got a problem." Someone responds immediately and says, "Oh, have you tried this, this, and this?" That's not us responding. That's our fans doing it. So try and think about how you can use your millions of players around the world to really aid the growth of your game. So we've talked about gaining, retaining, supporting. What is the end result? And for us, we've grown the game year on year, and it continues to grow. This is some confidential data, but we've grown our DARPU by 10% on the game, and that's been really focused by home. When we went live, it was a really successful game. It went to #1 grossing in Russia and a number of things, but we said that's not it. We can't rest on our laurels. We have to focus on these 4 elements. How do we get a consistent amount of people coming into the game? How do we keep people playing? How do we get people coming back? How do we get people talking about our game, and how do we service those people? And ultimately, on a straight DAU base, we've grown it 10% through events and regular updates. So we hope that what we've talked about for the last few minutes has helped you think about some things when it comes to making a live service game. Hopefully you can have the success we've had as well. We love live service stuff. We've come to the end of the presentation, but there's our email addresses. Grab us afterwards if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to know what tools you were using to measure these things, like how many folks are at tier 5, and like what type of tools do you normally ask developers to integrate before you decide to publish them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've worked with developers for such a long time that we don't really have a one tool fits all. Some developers that are making these games have their own tool set, and as long as that tool set passes kind of lots of legal checks, it's fine. We use a toolbox that they've just been bought by Upsite, but powered by Fuse. So Fuse powered tends to be quite nice for basic analytics, but then you've got things like Swerve or all sorts of tools that you can use. It's about, Andy's team do a great job in working with developers to make sure those are all configured correctly. Because you can have a great tool, but if you're not using it right, it's a waste of time. So it's about making sure your parameters are all configured. But there's lots of things out there. I often think the best ones are the ones you make yourself. So.
And I will thank you very much, and people please give them a round of applause.